Okay, well, welcome to the webinar series, Nature-Based Solutions. We are going to start now. This series of webinars is organized by Fundación Torcuato y Tella, Delta Alliance Argentinian Wing, together with Delft University of Technology and the International Forum on Urbanism, with the support of the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Buenos Aires. We also count with the participation of the Central Society of Architects and the Professional Council of Architecture and Urbanism. My name is Veronica Zagare. I have also introduced myself in the last webinar, but well, I'm working within the scope of the Delta Alliance Argentinian Wing and also Fundación Torcuato y Tella and Delft University of Technology. We are going to, I am going to give a brief presentation of the webinar. We are in webinar number 2. Today we are talking about design, planning, and governance regarding nature-based solutions. And we are about one webinar to go next week. The idea is to start in a plenary with the exposition of the experts and the presentation of cases of around the world. And then we are going to be divided into discussion groups. And finally, we are going back to the plenary to see the expositions of the conclusions of the discussion of the groups. This webinar will be recorded. The cameras and the microphones of the participants will be disabled during the plenary sessions, but during the discussion groups, all the cameras and microphones will be enabled, so you can discuss with the moderators and with the rest of the discussion group. Then we suggest to turn off all the notifications in your computer, like WhatsApp or Skype, to avoid any inconvenience or interference in your chat. Finally, there will be a brief space for questions after the expositions of the theories. So if you like to make any question, you can put it in the chat, and then we are going to choose 1 or 2 questions to ask to the speakers. I'm going to revise the program of today. After the institutional opening, Dr. Franche Husmeyer is going to give an introduction on the subject of design, planning, and governance. And the main expositions are going to be held by Dr. Mark Scott of the University College Dublin and Dr. Chris Evenbergen of the IHE Delft and TUDelft. Then we are going to have 2 case presentations given by the Nature Conservancy and Wetlands International Argentina. And finally, we are going to the discussion groups. So I'm going to give the word to Kim Van Newell, who is the director of Delta Alliance International. He's going to give the institutional opening of the webinar today. He is also affiliated with Climate Adaptation Services, the knowledge broker in the Netherlands for climate adaptation, operating the National Knowledge Platform and Climate Impact Atlas. Kim is lead author of the Dutch National Adaptation Strategy and advisor to the Dutch Delta program since its start in 2008. Also, Kim is chairman of the Dutch Wadden-Sea Society with 30,000 plus members protecting the wetlands north of the Netherlands. So climate adaptation, Delta's ecosystem, knowledge infrastructure, these are the things that Kim cares about. Kim, if you like to start, I'm going to turn off my video and you can share your screen.
Okay. Thank you, Veronica. Just a second. Can you see my presentation? I assume so, yes?
Okay.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you, Veronica. Buenos dias a todos. It's my pleasure to say a few words on behalf of the Delta Alliance. First, I would like to thank Veronica and the colleagues to organize this webinar series. Veronica is a visionary and very active coordinator of the Delta Alliance Argentina wing. And this webinar is a fine example of her approach to things, bringing the emerging topic of the nature-based solutions to the Latin American continent and mobilizing a wide array of experts. This is what the Delta Alliance is about, bringing people together to share knowledge and enhance capacity building within and among deltas. Delta Alliance is the international knowledge-driven network organization with a mission of improving the resilience of the world's deltas. We are a network of 19 deltas in 15 countries of the world. There are currently 5 new deltas interested in joining the Delta Alliance network. Together with the Delta Coalition, which is the policy network counterpart of the Delta Alliance, we have quite a strong network globally, as you can see. Our joint ambition is to enhance the resilience of the deltas in the world. This ambition is only getting more and more important as we are increasingly learning how crucial the vitality of the deltas is, yet at the same time, how they are increasingly under pressure of trends such as climate change, subsidence, and urbanization. The good news, I think, is that there are also many opportunities that we could seize. For instance, in better understanding the dynamics of the deltas in all their facets from an integrative point of view, I would say. One of the big challenges is to co-create knowledge to underpin actual knowledge policymaking. That may sound obvious, but dear policymakers, dear scientists, it is more complicated than you might think. But we can bridge that gap when we work on it jointly. The topic of this webinar series is an excellent example of one of those topics that are very promising in that respect. The first webinar, it was dealt with general concepts of nature-based solutions. Today we talk about design, planning, and governance. And next week's edition is on circular economy and financing. And I hope that through this string of webinars, we can get some steps closer to the actual use by the policymakers and investors of the knowledge and experience that is being developed. I would really like to urge you also today to take their perspective, how to invest in nature-based solutions in order to enhance the resilience of our deltas. Together with the World Wildlife Fund, we are currently working on a report on nature-based solutions for resilient Asian deltas, with which we want to illustrate the potential for investing in nature-based solutions in those Asian deltas. The report will be published next January, so stay tuned for that, please. In the meantime, we are currently also working on the Delta Alliance 2.0. Times and circumstances have changed, requiring different approaches. Hence, the need for a Delta Alliance 2.0. One of our ideas is to work more from a regional perspective. I believe that if deltas in certain regions join forces, there will be more opportunities, for instance, in terms of identifying knowledge gaps and exploring possibilities for research budgets. We have started with the Delta Alliance African network already, as you can see here on the sheet, and I would be really interested in exploring the possibilities of a Delta Alliance Latin American network. I know of some parties that are already very much. I would like to wish you a fruitful webinar, and back to you, Veronica.
Okay, thank you very much, Kim. Very interesting your presentation. Now I'm going to present from the National Direction of Climate Change, Maria Yelen Calvet and Macarena Vázquez. They are part of the team of coordination on adaptation within this National Direction of Climate Change. If you'd like to share your screen.
Buenos días a todos y todas. Muchas gracias por la invitación y por permitirnos participar de este espacio. Mi nombre es Macarena Vázquez, mi compañera María Yelen Calvet es quien está presentando la pantalla. Ambas estamos trabajando en la coordinación de adaptación frente al cambio climático dentro de la Dirección Nacional de Cambio Climático del Ministerio de Ambiente y Desarrollo Sostenible, y particularmente nosotras dos estamos trabajando sobre los lineamientos para implementar la adaptación basada en ecosistemas como enfoque transversal, y en función de que la temática de hoy tenía que ver con la gobernanza, nos pareció pertinente presentarles muy brevemente cómo es la estructura del Gabinete Nacional de Cambio Climático, que es el marco institucional previsto por la ley número 27.520, que es nuestra ley de cambio climático. Ayelen, si podrías pasar por favor a la próxima diapositiva. Bien. Bueno, la función del Gabinete Nacional de Cambio Climático es articular precisamente tanto el desarrollo como la implementación de políticas climáticas para la formulación y la implementación de las medidas previstas en el Plan Nacional de Adaptación y Mitigación al Cambio Climático. Y para ello, y en función de que uno de los principios más importantes que contempla la Ley de Cambio Climático es la transversalidad y la articulación entre los distintos niveles del Estado y las distintas áreas de gobierno, el Gabinete Nacional de Cambio Climático cuenta con distintos espacios para ir articulando y consensuando estas políticas. Por un lado tenemos la reunión de ministros, que se da 2 veces al año, la próxima es en diciembre, en la que se encuentran las autoridades máximas de todos los ministerios. Por otra parte está la mesa de puntos focales, que voy a explicar con un poco más de detalle, pero también muy breve en la próxima diapositiva, que básicamente lo que hace es desarrollar espacios para articular estas políticas en cada sector y también para desarrollar enfoques transversales. También contamos con una mesa de articulación provincial, respetando el hecho de que Argentina es un país federal, en la que se cuenta con representantes de las provincias, con puntos focales de cada provincia y fundamentalmente con el COFEMA, y una mesa ampliada en la que se propone que estas políticas se articulen también con la sociedad civil toda, fomentando la participación ciudadana. Respecto a esto, quería comentarles también que mañana hay una primer jornada de diálogo climático que está abierta a todo público, por lo cual si quisieran participar, más que bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Todas estas mesas, todos estos espacios de articulación son llevados adelante y coordinados por parte de la Secretaría de Cambio Climático, Desarrollo Sostenible e Innovación y la Dirección Nacional de Cambio Climático. Y más adelante, cuando tengamos ya en marcha o más formulados los siguientes planes nacionales de adaptación y mitigación al cambio climático, también estaremos trabajando con un consejo asesor en el que participarán científicos, universidades, distintas organizaciones de la sociedad civil, sindicatos, comunidades originarias. Pasamos a la siguiente, si puede ser. Bueno, esto era lo que les estaba comentando antes de ese segundo espacio de trabajo, que son las mesas de puntos focales o los grupos de trabajo. Lo que tenemos aquí son, dentro del gabinete, distintas instancias en las que articulamos con sectores, que son estos 11 círculos que podemos ver por fuera, de finanzas sostenibles, transporte, desarrollo productivo, trabajo y transición justa, agricultura, ganadería, pesca y bosques, minería, infraestructura. Todos estos que estamos viendo por fuera son grupos de trabajo sectoriales en los que nos encontramos tanto con los ministerios más afines, digamos, o a quienes las temáticas les resulta más propia. Por ejemplo, en el Ministerio de Educación y Cultura va a participar, evidentemente, el Ministerio de Educación, pero también con todas las otras áreas de gobierno que consideremos que sea necesario que participen en estos espacios o que tengan interés también en estar en ellos. Y por el otro lado, hay grupos de trabajo que son transversales, que son los 5 que se encuentran con letra en negro en el centro. Y bueno, hay un grupo de trabajo que también podría ser transversal, pero que está más que nada para definir el reglamento interno. En estos grupos transversales lo que hacemos es justamente abordar cuestiones que no podrían verse de forma sectorial. Todos estos grupos son espacios en los que se consensúa medidas y políticas que van a permitir delinear la estrategia de largo plazo de nuestro país y que también nos llevan a poder formular con precisión la contribución nacional determinada y la comunicación de adaptación. Pasamos a la siguiente. Bueno, hasta ahora, en realidad creo que tendríamos que actualizar estos números porque la semana pasada tuvimos aún más reuniones. Estos últimos 2 meses han sido muy intensos para el Gabinete Nacional de Cambio Climático. Hemos trabajado con 14 grupos de trabajo, hemos tenido 18 reuniones en las que han participado más de 225 personas entre puntos focales y representantes técnicos de los ministerios, lo cual para nosotros es un montón. Y durante todas estas reuniones hemos podido ir identificando distintas necesidades de cooperación que necesitamos para poder llevar adelante todas las medidas vinculadas a la política climática, También hemos llevado adelante numerosas capacitaciones semanales, especialmente para las provincias, que tendrán que desarrollar sus correspondientes planes de respuesta y sus planes de acción también a otros niveles subnacionales frente al cambio climático. Y también todas las semanas estamos comunicando todo esto que está sucediendo a través del boletín informativo. Una más. Y la idea, al menos desde la coordinación de adaptación dentro de la dirección climático, es poder llevar el enfoque transversal de adaptación basadas en ecosistemas, que podría pensarse como las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza en el área de adaptación al cambio climático, con el objetivo de reducir la vulnerabilidad y de aumentar la resiliencia tanto de los ecosistemas como de las comunidades frente a la situación de cambio climático, entendiendo que es un enfoque que puede adoptarse en todos los sectores y que debería ser prioritario porque tiene múltiples beneficios y conlleva una mejora para la calidad de vida de toda la sociedad, más allá de permitir una mejor adaptación al cambio climático, y entendiendo también que los ecosistemas son la base material, ¿no?, de la existencia de las sociedades, siempre, por supuesto, en el pleno respeto de los derechos humanos de las comunidades que habitan y dependen de estos ecosistemas. Muchas gracias.
Well, I'm going to present now Dr. Franz Hubmeier, Associate Professor of Environmental Technology and Design, researcher at Delta Urbanism Intelligence of Surface, Scientific Coordinator, Infrastructure and Environment Design Honors, Annotation DIMI, Editor Journal of Delta Urbanism. Franz, if you like to share your screen, thank you for being here.
Hi, Veronica.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I had a time mix-up because I'm teaching, so I was running a little bit late, and I'm now trying to open my presentation, but it's not working. So I need to have 1 minute. Okay. And restart because I'm using this crazy application, and apparently it was stuck. So, well, thank you very much for inviting me for this, very important topic. And I think it's absolutely important to have these discussions. And I wanted to share with you my my very Dutch perspective. That's what my short presentation is about. Excuse me. Ik zit midden in een seminar, sorry. That's what happens. So I'll share my presentation. There it goes. Yeah. And it has the same title as the presentation I gave for a seminar organized in Buenos Aires last year in December. And I felt that the title was still, especially introducing the seminar on design and governance, planning, design, and governance. I felt that all these three really share a culture in the sense that it's really important to be able to plan, design, and also govern a city and its nature in the right way to be climate resilient. The culture is quite important. That's why I also chose now to give quite a Dutch perspective on this, because I think that in the Netherlands, even though we have from the very, very old days quite an amphibious culture, which meant that you see here a small house of a farmer, that they were these were farmers, or they had another function in society, but they were always boatsmen. So the water and the living was for water has in the Netherlands been a quite important part of our culture. And also, if you especially look at the different say the dynamics of land and water over the centuries, you can see that we have cultured it into a situation where we are now, where actually the relationship between nature is not so self-evident. We as Dutch people have engineered our landscape so much that, well, we don't actually know what nature is. And water, I think, is one of the things that we all as Dutch people accept as a very natural thing. But especially then, if you go towards nature-based solutions, I guess that, yeah, if you talk about green roofs or maybe swales in urban areas that are very constructed, you can see that even implementing nature-based solutions also already needs a lot of technology, so that there's a very hybrid form. So maybe in this sense, you can, in different cultures, really see the relation between nature and engineering in the different gradations of hybridity. This is another example of our cities, where you can also see that by reconstructing the landscape, by putting in dikes to protect themselves from the water. And this is Amsterdam, actually, where you can see that, yeah, the reconstruction of nature has brought us to a situation in a landscape where we can really, well, we have to ask ourselves in adaptive planning, in nature-based solutions, in building resiliency, yeah, in what is still there that is nature, and on what can we turn back on. One of the things that we as a research group look into is reverse engineering with nature, and this is really about, well, we really want to reconnect with the natural systems. We have to, because to adapt to climate change and to mitigate as well. But we are in a very urbanized area, and how can we really, yeah, bring back nature in these areas? And one of the things is making other choices with engineering. So maybe trying to, well, in that sense, have nature-based solutions give the preference, even though they're maybe more expensive and maybe difficult to govern. But on the other end, it's also about in design and planning, seeing nature, that it's still there. This is a reversed gravity image of reverse gravity. And reverse gravity is people finding dirty walls, and with water and using by his water spout cleaning, using cleaning to make images. And this is how I really see the city, as an area that's of course denatured, but it's still there. And it's really a matter of getting it above head. So this is absolutely an interdisciplinary task. It needs interdisciplinary design, where all different disciplines from technology, but also ecology and others need to compose this city together and play this at the same time with very different maybe instruments. And I think there are already quite some, especially in relating it to planning and governance, examples where, for example, the implementation of a sewer, and this is not a nature-based solution, but where the implementation also had a large political, of course, impact. So I guess that we now have to replace this sewer with nature. And in that sense, I can see we just did this project about ecosystem participation, where you really see a sort of modernist thinking about the city, but then instead of using technology, using nature as the motor to bring people together. There are some examples in the Netherlands where you can see that nature, and this in this case permaculture in Hiva Langsmeer in the Netherlands, is really at the base of a bottom-up development, where people did it themselves, where they governed a public space themselves, and where they also have all urban systems as a community. And these were the examples. And also you see in nature-based solutions as a part of urban agriculture, where also bottom-up people are using this more for a social aim, but where you can see that, yeah, the reconnection to nature is quite important. This is the example in Rotterdam, where you see the bigger ecological structure. And on this map of the municipality, you can see that they govern the green areas, but there's also a lot of white areas. And interesting is that what they draw up is not always white, because this white strip is actually a very green strip of land that was forgotten by the municipality and is actually renatured by itself and very nature. And it's an interesting project because the people there, themselves, they took it upon them, and this is the quality of that nature on this very small strip. So it's really a forest experience. And the people in the area took it upon themselves to manage this and to bring people together. For example, there's also a doctor who takes his patients there because he believes that walking there in this natural area in the middle of town is quite important for the health of people. This is another project also in Rotterdam where you can see that they have a food garden where people work who need to re-enter society because they've been out for several reasons. And the food that they grow goes to the food bank. So that's distributed to families that are in need. And the last example on the larger scale is about a nature-based solution in Room for the River. So give the river a place that not only you get the river was given place, but also the city of Nijmegen was giving a central park where people really could enjoy the natural conditions. So the added value was also quite clear. Then, of course, this is, from the Dutch perspective, but I think that there's, all over the world, nice examples where they use the same, trying to plan, design, and govern urban situations where this nature is really, is really reconnected. This is an example of a project in Saga in Japan, Southern Kyushu Island, where they basically started with, connecting to the urban water system just by using it. So by cleaning it together and by boating in it together. And that was the start. And I think that's also a nature-based solution, which is maybe more from a governance perspective. So coming back to the interdisciplinarity of this theme, it also goes through skills as through disciplines. And as I said before, ecosystem participation, I think, is a whole new perspective where we don't take the ecosystem and nature-based solutions as what can they do for us in ecosystem services approach, but where we really look how can we place ourselves back into this system and participate with this. And ecosystem planning is another term that I think could be introduced, where you also much more on a larger regional scale decide where to live and where not to live, where to intensify and where not to intensify. And this is what I wanted to give with you for the seminar, and I am sure you will enjoy it a lot because there's a really nice list of speakers and discussions, and I hope to see the results later. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Franche, for your presentation. Now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, well, I'm going to present Dr. Mark Scott. He is Professor of Planning and Dean of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy in University College Dublin, Ireland. His research focuses on the environmental and sustainability dimensions of spatial planning, including green space and health, green infrastructure, climate change adaptation and resilience, and planning for rural places, publishing extensively in these areas. He has received research funding of approximately 6 million from national and European awards, and has acted as an advisor on spatial planning to the Irish Parliament, the Northern Ireland Regional Assembly, the OECD, and various regional and local planning authorities. Mark is an editor of the international journal Planning Theory and Practice, and is also on the editorial board of Town Planning Review. He also held visiting positions in the University of New South Wales, Sydney, and the University of Pisa. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to let you share your screen, if you like. Well, welcome to the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Veronica, and thanks very much for the invitation to talk to this webinar today. As Veronica said, my name is Mark Scott from University College Dublin in Ireland. I'm going to talk about some of the governance, planning and design issues in relation to nature-based solutions. So it's not really a technical presentation, but it's going to be focused more on governance and issues of problem solving. So the focus of my presentation will be on this idea of linking knowledge and action. So we sort of know the knowledge of MBS benefits, but what is the question of delivery? How do we deliver those on the ground? And how do we embed nature-based solutions thinking within spatial planning frameworks and within urban design as well? So I'm going to start very briefly with my understanding of nature-based solutions. So I know you've been talking about this extensively, so I'll skirt over that very briefly. I'm going to identify some of the benefits of MBS at an urban scale, but really what I'm going to focus on is this idea of translating knowledge to action and the role of planning within that process. And the way I'm going to try to illustrate this is through 3 governance stories. So I'm going to look at 3 examples. The first of disrupting planning practice from a bottom-up perspective. The second, I'm going to look at some ideas around interdisciplinary problem solving through a serious games-based approach. And thirdly, I'm going to look at some experiences in relation to the co-production of new knowledge or co-designing green space for health benefits with local communities. And these 3 stories really relate to some projects I've been involved with over the last 7, 8 years or so. So this is more for my benefit than your benefit. You've been listening to talks on MBS this week and last week. So I tend to use the term a little bit interchangeably with green infrastructure and also ecosystem services based planning or ecological planning. But I suppose the starting point is the definition used by the European Commission, which is MBS or actions which are inspired by, supported by, or copied from nature. So from a planning perspective, and I'm a planner by background, the traditional approach dealing with many environmental or ecological issues has been a sort of islands of protection approach. So drawing lines on a map and protecting and preserving particular places. And I think what we're seeing now is a much more holistic ecosystems-based approach that is starting to take root. So not just protecting, but also enhancing, creating, restoring, and designing new green infrastructure and using MBS as a methodology. So this encompasses a range of interventions at a range of scales, from citywide ecological networks through to the very micro scale level of green roofs and green walls. And we now have a very extensive evidence base on the benefits of nature-based solutions. And I think key to this, though, is understanding that not only does MBS deliver each of these bullet points individually, drainage management, habitat protection, health, and so on, but it's the potential of MBS to deliver these simultaneously and to deliver a package of benefits within any MBS interventions. So delivering all of those points simultaneously, I think, is its key advantage. So although now we have a compelling evidence base that MBS delivers these multiple benefits ranging from our health to habitat protection and so on, how do we actually translate that knowledge into action or interventions on the ground? And how can we deliver nature-based solutions? So this will be the focus really of my presentation today. So in this slide, I've just put up so that the typology of planning policy instruments that are applicable to most urban challenges. So planners tend to use regulatory controls along with voluntary methods, design guidance, market-based instruments, both incentives and disincentives, and public or community ownership as well. And if we map that onto MBS delivery, we can see a range of tools at our disposal, from development plans, development management, designating protected sites in terms of regulation, from voluntary methods of improved information, demonstration projects, to market-based instruments, incentivizing outcomes through like land preservation or habitat banking through tax breaks, for example, or discouraging behaviour such as compensation schemes for loss of green space, right through to public and community ownership. But I want to sort of take a step back from those delivery mechanisms to ask a sort of a broader question. And that is about how an idea gains traction initially, and how can we embed an idea that filters through the whole planning system. So rather than thinking about nature-based solutions as an endpoint or a goal, it's how does this become a policy or governance device for solving complex problems? And moreover, how does a policy concept then gain that professional, public and political support that's vital for its implementation? And I think key to that process is this idea of policy framing, how we frame ideas initially, from initiation right through to delivery. So I'm going to be talking about 3 examples from the Irish context. So I thought I'd just spend 1 minute just talking about the Irish planning system as a kind of contextual factor. Ireland, we're a small country. We have a multi-level planning system, which is primarily focused on the regulation of land use. So it's kind of based on the British land use planning model. In a European context, planning in Ireland is quite poorly resourced in terms of personnel, but yet at the same time is faced by very rapid urban development change processes. So from the mid-2000s up to the financial crisis, and again starting now, Ireland has one of the fastest rates of house building in Europe per capita. And that pressure of urban development has often led to some quite poor choices and some quite detrimental environmental impacts as well. We also work as planners within an overwhelmingly pro-development political culture as well. So planning is very much positioned as about delivering development, and that's key to the ethos of the politics of the state here. So I'm not trying to position Ireland as a good practice case study at all. I think we've seen maybe examples of that from the Netherlands, for example. But instead, it provides an information-rich case of how to try to embed a new idea, particularly something that goes against the grain in terms of policy concepts. So how do we embed like an ecological idea into spatial planning frameworks? So I'm going to try to sort of demonstrate some of these ideas through looking at 3 different governance stories, as I put it, in relation to how MBS and green infrastructure and related concepts have become increasingly embedded into Irish planning practice. And the first example I want to look at relates to how disruptive planning at a local scale has really changed how we plan in Ireland in relation to green infrastructure and MBS issues. So really from the start of the 2000s until today, we've really seen green infrastructure in particular move from a very marginal position to the mainstream of planning practice. I kind of want to chart that journey today in some respects. And it really began not with a national directive or a national policy change of direction, but from a small number of local municipalities experimenting with ideas around nature and design, nature and planning, and this idea of a GI concept. It was limited initially to greenways and recreation, but over quite a short period, within a decade, it became the sort of standard way of planning in Ireland, with each local municipality in Ireland now having a statutory green infrastructure strategy. And also the National Planning Framework, which was adopted 2 years ago, now sees green infrastructure as being absolutely central to the sustainable management of land use. So this table sets out that sort of policy journey in many respects, showing how green infrastructure and designing with nature started from quite small beginnings, but took on more and more properties as the concept developed and grew larger. So particularly gained impetus with this idea that it would help with recreation planning and amenity. So this idea of greenways, like we see pictured at the top of the screen. But increasingly, we've seen a much more ecological focus being put on top of green infrastructure ideas. And by 2010s, early 2010s, green infrastructure was being positioned as essential infrastructure within Irish planning delivery. So being seen in the same way as a traditional grey infrastructure of road and rail and so on. And in many ways, this was about meeting these multiple objectives, but also our wider European environmental obligations that we have been quite poor in delivering up to that point. So one of the, I guess, forerunners was a local authority in Ireland called Fingal County Council, which is just north of Dublin City. So it's an area that's seeing rapid growth, but in the context of quite an ecologically sensitive area with lots of protected sites. And what was innovative, I think, about Fingal was it moved its ecologists right into its development planning team. So rather than just professional planners, it had moved ecologists center stage in the process of planning, regulating, and designing for new places, new residential areas within the local authority area. I think these ecologists were key in challenging traditional planning ways of working and traditional practices and introducing ideas like the ecosystem approach into planning practice in Ireland. So in a way, they were ideally placed to bridge planning for the built environment to the planning for the natural environment as well. So here we see in this example, looking at residential development as it sort of encroaches on protected areas, but also how we bring nature into that new residential development as well. So what was quite interesting about how green infrastructure took hold in Ireland was, as I say, it was a bottom-up process and then a slow diffusion across local authorities as they learned from each other. So early successes were replicated in other local authorities, but I think it was this idea of ecologists emerged as real policy entrepreneurs, as agenda setters in the policy process, who were promoting ideas, testing new practices, and communicating very well with other local authorities in relation to shifting policy approaches. The other thing I think was quite important was this policy framing through using different metaphors to describe planning practice. So I think in the Irish context, a very pro-development state, environmental preservation had always been seen as a barrier to development. But using these different terms, ecosystem services, green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, this sort of reframed the debate in a much more positive way. And I think elected representatives in particular started to buy into these ideas, particularly the idea of green infrastructure, seemed to be something to invest in, not just simply something that was a barrier to development. I think it's also important to recognise the importance of EU funding that allowed local authorities to experiment with practical schemes that allowed this sort of demonstration of ideas to be put into practice. So green infrastructure, idea of planning with nature started to be seen as a way of satisfying multiple environmental obligations within local authorities. The second example relates to an interdisciplinary problem project we were involved with that involved using a game-based approach. So we were working with local authorities that had just experimented with green infrastructure. And I think it was very important to recognise that local authorities themselves are made up of different professions, different departments, and they don't really operate as one monolithic block, but have these different competing priorities. So we were looking at ways to generate new ways of working that fostered interdisciplinary problem solving. So our response was really to develop a game-based approach as a way of encouraging new joint problem solving at the local authority level. So we used quite a low-tech method. We actually devised a board game for small multidisciplinary groups to work with. So we got them to sit around in small teams, roll a dice, land on a different problem, and set them a challenge to solve. We used a fictional place as a way of opening up that space to allow people to think creatively about problem solving. But what we find, people naturally started to solve problems in their own area as well. So this approach seemed quite simple, but it really allowed a new space for problem solving within the local authority that broke down traditional barriers or bureaucratic routines in relation to working, and allowed us much more interactive and creative process of problem solving, and in some ways shifted the way institutions started to work. So we worked with 4 different local and regional authorities, all of which devised new strategies on the back of this. And the last example relates to the idea of co-design or co-production of new knowledge with different stakeholders. In this case, we were working with communities to look at MBS solutions for enhancing health and well-being. So traditionally, planners have often approached this issue in relation to looking at quantity of green space, but we were looking much more at the quality of green space and the health promoting attributes within those green spaces as well. So there's a big difference between the picture at the top of a little used green space on the edge of a housing development to a much more active greenway at the bottom. So our response was really to test different ideas in relation to intensive citizen-led design processes. So we had surveyed about 600 households to identify some design attributes, and then we tested those in design workshops to develop evidence-based design principles. So these were kind of workshops like this, where we worked intensively within local communities for a few days. We asked the local citizens involved to rank the different attributes that were identified in the surveys, and then start to solve problems in relation to aerial photographs of their own local green spaces. So they're mostly working aerial photographs, and they produced maps like this. They started to redesign areas, and we would incorporate those along with interviews to come up with a design guideline for the relevant local authorities. And again, it was really interesting, the different ideas that really challenged the way local authorities and municipalities have been designing green spaces. So there was an overwhelming emphasis on the idea that green spaces represented a public health infrastructure for local residents. So they valued green spaces for the functions they provided. What we found interesting was there's a real move away from urban green spaces as quite manicured parks to be a much more natural. So like the picture at the top, much more like meadows rather than just simply mowed grass and flower planting. Also, there's much more emphasis on multifunctional green spaces that recognize the co-benefits of things like solving noise pollution or local air pollution, and also green spaces that linked to a wider greening of the urban public realm. So like the plan at the bottom of the screen here, not just parks, but also these greenways, tree-lined avenues, and how it would relate to small patches of green spaces as well. So then just to move on to final slide, which is looking at drawing out some of the conclusions from that. I think the idea of framing and how we frame issues around nature-based solutions is critical, and the emphasis on solutions or infrastructure, I think, is key to framing a debate in a certain way and coming up with new ways of working. So again, we weren't looking at MBS as a design outcome, but very much as a problem-solving device that would be embedded into land use or citywide governance. So spanning disciplinary boundaries, co-design, co-production, involving diverse stakeholders, and looking at how MBS could solve a wide array of problems in quite a cost-effective way. So institutional capacity building and institutionalization then on delivery was really the next question. So it encouraged quite a pragmatic use of policy instruments. And I know next week, I think you're looking at the economic dimensions of nature-based solutions. I think it really ties into different market-based instruments that could help deliver as well. So thank you for listening, and I'd take any questions later today.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for your excellent presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to present now Dr. Chris Evenbergen. He is professor at the Water Engineering Department of IHE Delft and at TUDelft, the Netherlands. He is also visiting professor at the Southeast University and at the North China University of Water Resources and Electric Power. He was a member of the board of the public-private innovation platform Clean Tech Delta, the Netherlands, in 2013, and and 2014, and on the Netherlands partnership from 2010 to 2013. He is now chairman of the academic board of the master program River Delta Development of 3 applied universities in the Netherlands and project director of Delta Cup in Bangladesh, founded by the Dutch government. He worked as a researcher and consultant on various environmental issues, including climate adaptation and water management of urban systems. In the past 15 years, he has accumulated extensive national and international experience with integrated approaches to manage floods in urban environments. He has published, edited 5 books and more than 120 scientific publications in the field of environmental engineering and urban flood management. He was co-founder and chairman of the European Network Coast C22 on urban flood management. He chairs the flood resilience group of the TUDelft. Thank you very much. Chris, you can turn on your camera and share your presentation if you like.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you can, yes. Let's see. You can see me now?
Yes, perfect. Great.
Perfect. Okay, then I will share the screen. Let's see. Okay. Okay, thank you, Veronica, for the invitation to be a speaker in this webinar and for the excellent organization. I think you did a real good job. And also, I would like to acknowledge, say, the organizing institutions such as the Delta Alliance, and I understand that Kim Nieuwal, the director of the Delta Alliance, is also one of the participants of this webinar. So I'm also speaking on behalf of the Delta Alliance because IHE is a member of the Delta Alliance. Yeah, I would like to give a presentation from the perspective of IHE, and that is I would say, the international perspective on nature-based solutions, and more predominantly from the global south. So that is a bit what I would like to do. But as Mark was referring to some European projects, I would like some words about that as well. What we see that Europe is putting a lot of emphasis on nature-based solutions. We have our programs, the Horizon programs on nature-based solutions. There's a lot of money going into research. So there's a lot going on in Europe. And still, if we see where are we now, the criticism which we receive in Europe is that it's still very fragmented. If you look at the projects which we have across Europe, they are quite on a very limited, small scale, and they lack what they call a sort of critical mass to have a real, I would say, meaningful impact on a larger scale. And of course, there are a lot of exceptions, but we have to conclude that nature-based solutions in Europe is still in a sort of early stage of development. The upscaling is constrained by several factors. I come to that later. And so there is still, I would say, a lot of work to do, and that is in Europe, but also in other places of the world.
Sorry, Mark, we cannot see your screen. Are you sharing the screen now?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, that's not a problem. I will see what I can do about that. Share the screen. Yes. Let's see whether it can work like this. You can see.
Okay,
now?
great. Thank you.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
thank you. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, Veronica. So let's start. What I would like to do is to give some general notions, and then from the perspective of the urban dimensions from cities, and the central focus of this webinar is on, say, the urban dimension. So I would start with some general notions. Then I would like to elaborate a bit more on Spon Cities, the Spon City program in China. And the reason for that is that at the heart of Spon City program are nature-based solutions. And China, as you know, is a country which is very much top-down governance, and they are now heavily putting sponge cities on the forefront, and they have very ambitious targets to roll out the concept of sponge cities. So I think that's interesting to follow these developments and to learn from China. And then I would like to finish with some conclusions about the enabling factors. And Mark was also reflecting on those as well. So there is maybe some overlap there. Now, first, if you talk about cities, then especially in the global south, they are exploding. They are growing very fast. And what you see here is say the new urban developments around the greater Bangkok, and these areas where, of course, the wetlands, the sponge, which was, I would say, dampening the peaks and prevent the flooding of Bangkok. But what you see now, the urban growth is expanding, and the wetlands are disappearing, and that causes a major problems. So in Bangkok, there is a lot going on, and a lot of green area are being lost. And the same holds for a lot of coastal cities, where you see that the mangrove forests are disappearing. And this is the Pearl River Delta, and this area is the most vulnerable of the globe in terms of potential damage. And that is partly caused by the loss of those natural systems, which act as a buffer against extreme events. Another example is in Indonesia. This is Kendari. This is a very typical coastal city. And what you see here is not a very unique issue. It's very generic. What you see is sedimentation of the bay. There's a lot of pollution, and the sedimentation in the bay is constraining the discharge of the river system. So it means that this city is rapidly changing, and the causes of those changes are the hydrological changes, are the encroachment, the disappearance of the green areas of the tropical forest, which is surrounding the city. The forest is being illegally urbanized, encroached, and that causes a lot of sedimentation, and that triggers a cascade of effects. So the loss of green in Kendari is causing major problems in this city. And this is I would say, a very general problem which we see in many, I would say, thousands cities along coast. Another example is one of our students. He's working in Jakarta, and he's looking at how the loss of green is really impacting the temperature. And what you see is, if you compare the situation in 1995 and 2014, you see that the temperature is really increasing. We have more hot days, and when we compare those hot spots with the land use change, then we see a sort of overlap there where green is being lost. We see that the temperature peaks are increasing. Another example is Egypt, where this is Alexandria. This is the second largest city in Egypt, and the city is rapidly expanding, and the rice, the paddy fields, and the agricultural land around those cities is slowly consumed and disappearing. And last picture is the Netherlands. We have the Green Heart, and the Green Heart is an area in our Dutch Delta metropole, and this area urbanization is prevented, is prohibited. But if you really consider the facts, then you see that this area is under extreme pressure, and the urban development along the strips, the fringes of the Green Heart are being urbanized. So we are slowly losing our Green Heart, and the Green Heart has a major function in the hydrology of our system, apart from all the other benefits it has. So the first notion I would like to say is that green cities, we are losing more green than we are introducing green. So if we talk about nature-based solutions, I would say the first thing we have to do is to preserve what we have, and to really acknowledge that the relevance of preserving those areas. Now, the further densification, infill, but also expansion is happening all over the place. But we should be very keen on preserving the green. So that's a bit an open door for you, but I think it's important that we have attention to that aspect as well. And that's not only in the global south, but also in Europe is that occurring, where we see that green is also disappearing. If we look at the policy support for nature-based solutions, as I told you, in Europe, there's a much emphasis on nature-based solutions in Europe, and we have a lot of constraints to really upscale nature-based solutions. But also on the global level, we have the Paris Agreement, which is heavily pushing not only mitigation, but also adaptation, and thereby also nature-based solutions. We have, many policy levels, incentives to really become green, but still it is a challenge. So the notion number 2 is that blue-green infrastructure is currently still focused on to serve as a sort of extension of the gray infrastructural system. So we add green to gray, and the reason we are doing that is to add some flexibility to gray and to expand the capacity of gray infrastructure. So the focus primarily is still on, accommodating the gray infrastructure, and which is as such not a stupid thing to do. You see here, for instance, in Taiwan, in Kaohsiung, where in the center of the city, an industrial area has been transformed into a retention pond, into a nature-based solution system, and the motivation, the key motivation, is the water system and urban drainage. In the Netherlands, we have started already more than 25 years ago with the installation of nature-based solutions. You see here a picture of a Wadi system in Enschede, in the eastern part of the Netherlands, and those systems are currently being evaluated. Are they still performing as they should be? Because there is a lack of we say, a track record, a historical track record of those systems. We have no really an understanding how they behave on the longer term. And of course, that is crucial if we want to invest. So these systems are being installed purely to expand the gray infrastructural systems and to ease what we say the hydrology of those areas. Now in China, we have that Smart City program, which has been launched in 2014, very ambitious program, which aims to have 80% of the 600 cities in China with more than 1 million inhabitants into a smart city. So that's a very ambitious target, to get 600 of those big cities to transform the cities in smart city. Now, and the driver, of course, is the massive floods we see in China. In China, we especially in the last 10 years, the damage caused by floods are really extremely high and are really impacting the economy of China. And that's why President Xi has launched that program. And if we go to the roots, to the causes of those problems, then we have to go back to the recent history, because in the recent history, the Chinese cities had this type of features where you see that there are a lot of water systems, all indigenous water systems in those cities. But within a period of 20 years to 30 years time, those cities were transformed in those massive big cities, as you can see on the background. So the transformation from a small scale city with a lot of acknowledgement of the indigenous water system into a city with 1 million plus inhabitants took place in a period of 20 to 30 years. And that is, of course, a very rapid pace when we compare those with how European cities are growing. It takes more than, a century at least to grow a city from, a few 10,000 inhabitants to 1 million or even more, while in China it only takes 2 decades. So you can imagine that imperfections in the design of the infrastructural systems, they appear on a massive scale at the same time in China. In our situation, we have a learning curve. We implement our systems and we learn from those systems, and we have time to adjust. But in China, there is no time to adjust. So that's why there is on a massive scale, say the adverse impacts of those infrastructural systems. Now the Smart City program is being introduced by President Xi, and he is also making, say, the policy where China needs to shift from the industrial to the ecological civilization. And that is really driving the use of nature-based solutions, natural processes in those smart cities. So smart cities is all about blue-green infrastructure and how that blue-green infrastructure can be blended with the gray infrastructure, how those systems can be designed in an integrative, synergistic way. And that is where the Smart City program started. But what we see now is that the scope of the Smart City concept is expanding. It's no longer about water quality and water quantity, but it's also about livability. It's about the economic impact on housing. And so they are, you can say, the performance indicators of nature-based solutions are expanding and are increasing, and that's on the similar lines as Mark just mentioned, that the benefits should be taken into account to really foster the implementation. Now, what is China doing? And this is a picture I took of Kunshan 2 years ago, and this is a Smart City project, but it's not a wetland or a recreational park. No, it's urban agriculture. So there's a strong notion that that wetlands and constructed wetlands are, of course, very useful and can add quality to the city. But if we look at the demands of the citizens, those people who are moving to the city, they have often an agricultural background, and they like to have their own garden where they can have their crops and produce food. Now, the objective is to produce about 20% of the needs through urban agriculture, which is linked to the Smart City program. So that is, I think, a very interesting development where we really see that the multiple benefits are now really driving the implementation of Smart City technologies. Now, another one, and that is a recent one, we have on the 19th November, and that is today, a webinar organized by Rotterdam and Singapore, and that is about COVID and green cities. And the story behind that is that COVID is a sort of window of opportunity to really appraise and reappraise, say, green. And the city of Rotterdam has observed that a lot of citizens are using the green spaces now to relax, to have some outdoor recreation, and that has a positive impact on their health. So the Rotterdam is now really saying that greening the city and their green policy has a positive impact on the COVID recovery. And there is that webinar as we speak on is today, and the Singapore has a similar story, a similar motivation. So again, here you see that green cities and nature-based solutions, they have multiple benefits, and we are more and more capable of including them. So the scope of blue-green infrastructure is expanding, and that is what we really see all around. But still, the question remains how to value those systems. How do we capture all those benefits in a sort of valuation system which really fosters and support the implementation of blue-green infrastructure? And that is still a question. Now, another notion is what we call the transformation challenge. And for example, I give you a Chinese city here. This is the city of Beijing. And what you see is that there are, say, 4 rings. The city comprises 4 rings. The center is the historical town, the old city, and then we have rings which have been developed in a later stage, and the green area is say the area which is now expanding very fast. Now, if we look how those cities this city can be transformed in a sponge city, and how nature-based solutions can be implemented here, it is important to see the, I would say, the temporal dimension. Now you can imagine this is the historical part, and there is not much room for nature-based solutions in those areas. What is the policy here? That it should be protected against floods as much as possible. So there is little room for maneuver. And the same holds a bit on the old city, which is a ring around the historical city. There is not much room there, and the policy is to really preserve those typical architecture and this typical urban landscape. There is no real incentive to change. But this is the third ring, and the third ring has been developed, say, over the past 20 to 30 years, and there the dynamics are quite there. The buildings are being renewed. There is a lot of, we say, urban dynamics in those areas, and these regeneration momenta, they also provide opportunities to introduce green. Now you can imagine that that the transformation towards a sponge city in this area is a slow process, and it is estimated that it will take at least 1 generation to make a real sponge city of the third ring. That's a slow process. And these are some examples of projects where the existing city is being transformed into a green city. It's a slow process, and it is opportunity driven. And last but not least, it's the new developments. Of course, those new developments, they all comply with the stringent standards of the sponge city policy. So as you can see here. So what the notion is here, notion number 4 is the transformation challenge, that we have to have a long-term vision on how that city can transform. We have to develop pathways. We have to understand the urban dynamics. We have to understand where are the opportunities to intervene in the existing urban fabric, and that will help us to transform the city into a green city and to make really green infrastructure in city. But that is a long process that cannot be done overnight. And what you see here is some images that have been made by the city of Rotterdam, and this is how Rotterdam is considering its future, where it wants to go, and where are the opportunities. So opportunity mapping, making real an understanding of the life cycle of the urban components is part of that strategy. Now, given all those notions, then you can say there is a paradigm shift needed to really require, say, uptake and mainstreaming of nature-based solutions. So in the traditional approach, we were very much targeted on economic efficiency, but in the new approach, where we have maybe a limited understanding about the risk and the long-term opportunities, there are a lot of questions. It is more about unlocking the economic potential. It's more about appraising the economic potentials than that we are capable of really having a very solid cost-benefit analysis underlying the economics. Then the focus is also shifting. In the old times, we were focused on individual components, on individual items, but now in the modern strategy, it's more about systems and their interdependencies. So we are really looking how to link the different aspects and the different systems. And that also means that we are moving away from single projects to more program-based approaches, where we learn from the different projects, and that we really use that knowledge to improve the next round of projects. So there is a sort of learning cycle built into that, and that can only be conducted when we have programs instead of single projects. Also, the time horizon is expanding. In the present day, we have a time horizon of, say, 20 years, but we see now that our timelines are being expanded and expanded, and even 2100 is now the sort of timeline we are looking into, and that also allows to develop those pathways, the transition pathways for cities to become really green. In the old days, we had an understanding about the risks, and that was also, I would say, an underlying factor for the robust approach, where we have a clear understanding about the costs and the benefits. But in the new approach, we are quite uncertain about the future, so we want to build more flexible systems so that greening of gray systems will add that flexibility, and that also means that we have to acknowledge that we do not understand as we were used to the cost and the benefits. So what are the principles? And I think what it's a bit a summary of what I have said, that when we consider nature-based solutions, it's very important to have an understanding about, say, the local conditions, about the system, how the system is functioning, and system analysis has to be conducted. And that requires a lot of local knowledge and understanding about the local context, which is by far more important than for gray infrastructure. So nature-based solutions require a system-based approach, and of course that long-term perspective is connected to that. So how do those systems behave on the longer term? And the second principle is that we have to acknowledge the multiple benefits, and we have to exploit those multiple benefits as much as possible, and have to value those multiple benefits. And one of them is, of course, the adaptability, and we are still, say, lacking the right tools to value that capacity of adaptability in our programs. Now, the third principle I would like to skip. Now, the last two slides is what hampers implementation, and implementation is hampered not only in Europe, and of course there are exceptions, and there are a lot of success stories, but it's still not mainstream. But if you look at in the South, I think the issue is even worse. Now, what's hampering the widespread implementation? That's the accountability, that we still lack the indicators to value the benefits and impacts of blue-green infrastructure. We are not able to give that full appreciation. We have a capacity gap. We lack knowledge about how do those systems really behave. How can we design those systems? What's their long-term behavior? There are a lot of questions which are really more challenging than the gray systems. And there is, last but not least, and that is related to the first two, the funding gap, to how to get the money invested into green, and how to develop, say, long-term financial mechanisms. Because if we talk about adaptability and flexibility, it also means that those systems can be expanded, can be adjusted over time, and that also require different financial schemes than we are used to for gray. Last slide, enabling conditions. One of the key issues which is now more and more being mentioned when we talk about enabling conditions is that we are really in need of locally led business models. That means that we need local knowledge, local stakeholders to really define the benefits and the costs, because the benefit and the costs are mostly also at a local level. So we need locally led business models, and that means a strong engagement of the local stakeholders. The second point is the showcase the benefits of blue-green infrastructure in demonstration projects, in pilot projects. Now, the European Commission is heavily promoting demonstrations, and of course there are also some pitfalls about demonstrations. If you talk about the governance of demonstration projects, that is not really reflecting the real life situation. That we are aware of that, but we also see that those demonstrations are often triggering, say, communities to really get motivated to have those systems in their community as well. And that requires, and that's the last point, peer learning. We have to connect the different initiatives and the stakeholders around those initiatives, that they are learning together, and that learning process should be fostered, and that is referred to as peer learning. And that is the only way to really accelerate, say, that learning process and the upscaling. So, Veronica, this was in a nutshell my presentation.
Thank you very much, Chris, for your excellent presentation. And I have one question for each one of you. Maybe we can start with your with a question for you, Chris, and then I'm going to present another question for Mark. To start with your question, Chris, you have presented very well the 3 principles, and you talk about the need for a long-term vision to have a real implementation of nature-based solutions as a complementary action with the green infrastructure. What is your advice for some countries, for example, in Latin America, which finds very difficult to have long-term actions? We have very short-term urgent matters to attend, and sometimes it is difficult to think in a long-term way due to problems, due to lack of funding and some political and economical problems. Which is your advice for Latin America, for example?
Yeah, that's a very good question and not an easy question. But I think that in order to break the spiral of being too much focused on the day-to-day issues and to really break out of that harness which hampers to move into that greening strategy, it is needed to have a vision where people are really being encouraged to take initiative and to take responsibility. So what we see, for instance, in the Netherlands, we have our Delta program, and the Delta program has a sort of end goal of 2100. And the beauty of setting that horizon so far is on the one hand that it will not really, I would say, lead to political tensions, because when a target is put in very remotely, then the politicians are not really, I would say, directly impacted. It's safe to talk about the long-term future instead of the short-term. So that's one thing. Another thing is that when we are not aligning our short-term plans with our long-term ambitions, then we can create lock-ins. We can develop projects on the short term, which on the longer term could provide a hurdle to really get into that sustainability pathway. So to have an understanding and a vision on the long term helps you also to take the right decisions on the short term. So a long-term vision is needed to have commitment, to have political commitment, and also to provide a sort of steering mechanism for your short-term actions. So that would be my argument, why it is so beneficial.
Okay, thank you very much. Very, very clear argument on this. And I have another question for Mark. It's related to this the participation of the people. The participants of the webinar are very interested on your game approach. So they are asking if you can explain how you can determine actions of nature-based solutions through these games, and which is your idea of how we can reach to co-creation using these methodologies.
Thanks for the question. I think that what worked about the game-based approach was just helping to demystify some aspects of decision-making. So when you're working with local communities, some aspects of nature-based solutions can seem quite technical, but really this is a way of sort of in quite a relaxed environment, problem solving at quite a site-specific scale, but then from that sort of drawing out different principles that can be used and applied to different areas. So it was all about just getting very different types of stakeholders to have a conversation and to try to bring their own perspectives, whether it's their own local knowledge or their own technical abilities, to solve problems jointly. And I think just using the game was just a way of enabling start throwing a bit more fun into it, where people sort of felt it wasn't like a formal consultation process. Instead, it was something that was quite interesting to participate in. The co-design workshops were much more design focused, and it was a very specific outcome with that. But again, joining local knowledge, but also how locals use their own green spaces and their own resources, I think is very valuable, because they might not use them in the way that designers, planners, or urban designers expect. So I think it's important. I mean, I think what was happening in Ireland, for example, in relation to green spaces, was particularly elected representatives were prioritizing green spaces for generally young men to play football, and instead older people weren't catered for, the very young weren't catered for, people who don't play team-based sports weren't catered for. So it was about creating a much more multifunctional environment, and bringing in different community perspectives really rammed that home for key decision makers. So I think it's diverse voices, building expertise, but also doing that in quite a relaxed environment that becomes quite a creative problem-solving way of working.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And well, we have finished with the keynote presentations. I thank Dr. Mark Scott and Dr. Chris Ebenbergen for their participation. They were very interesting presentations. And I'm going to present now the cases presentation. The presentation of cases is starting with Ana Becar Varela. She's environmental engineer from the University of the Catholic University of Argentina, program project and stakeholder management at the Nature Conservancy Argentina, leading the water projects, which articulate governance issue, nature-based solutions, prioritization of areas of high conservation value, among others. And Jaime Camacho, he studied environmental communication at the San Francisco de Quito University. He currently coordinates the freshwater strategy for the Nature Conservancy in Ecuador. He develops and implements conservation projects with local governments and local community in various sectors of Ecuador, including coastal marine areas, mountains, and Amazonian forest. They are going to present the water founds in Latin America. Welcome to the webinar. You can share your screen if you like.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. There we go. Okay, then. Good afternoon, everyone. Together with Jaime Camacho, we will be presenting the water funds, which is a mechanism soundly deployed in Latin America and other geographies to address water challenges. First, I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to be part of this event with such an interesting and necessary theme. And it's an honor to me to share this space with the keynote speakers already that I've already heard. It was very valuable content for our ongoing learning on water issues. Well then, in a word, water funds are the mechanism of choice from TNC's part for the design, planning, and governance of nature-based solutions for water security. In that sense, we are working with cities and water users around the world to create water funds, enabling water users to collectively invest in source water protection activities for the purpose of securing better water quality and improving the health and well-being of local communities. When tackling water security issues, there are many strengths and opportunities within the water funds methodology. These are briefly sketched on the right section of the slide and are very much related to what Dr. Chris Sevenberger has just explained as enabling conditions, the common vision, the long time scale approach. It's very much related to the things here presented. But I want to highlight the following strengths. of course, the timely and spatial scope of work. A water fund temporal horizon is that of at least a decade or more. That exceeds electoral timing, exceeds the usual corporate planning time frames. This longer time frame is essential to provide proper solutions related to water issues. As I recall from last Wednesday's presentations on China, on the Netherlands, and today's examples on China as well and Ireland, that is the timescale of all the interventions described. In terms of extension of its scope, water funds address the whole watershed. That scope is in general much broader than any scope of any sole water user, either them being a company or a whole sector, such as the irrigation sector, the agricultural sector. In general, that punctual sectoral approach needs the collective vision of a broader approach, and that approach is the one that one gains from addressing the system from the whole watershed perspective. And last, for me, the most important strength of water funds is the combination of robust science, and by that I mean hydrological modeling and due prioritization of areas applied within a proven methodology, accompanied by a much needed flexibility, so that each water fund can successfully be inserted in the governing mechanism already in place in every particular setting. What I'm talking about is making water funds work in 9 different countries, in 26 different basins, with their particular biophysical settings, their particular political systems, and cultural traits. Using Dr. Chris Sevenberger's words, it relates to the need of locally led business models. I'm not gonna go into the details of this slide. It just shows the different dimensions of water security. And what I want to show here is that even though we acknowledge the importance of gray infrastructure in solving many water challenges, we show them here in comparison to the nature-based solutions that water funds specifically put a spotlight on. Examples of nature-based solution projects within water funds in place are buying and protecting land, working with farmers and forest managers to support changes in agricultural practices, building artificial wetlands to reduce the costs of wastewater treatments, repair and restoration, among others. In a minute, you will hear from Jaime firsthand about nature-based solution interventions in place in the Guayaquil Water Fund in Ecuador. TNC and its partners already have created 25 water funds in Latin America and several others in Africa, Asia, and North America. In Argentina, there are 2 water funds in progress, one in the Rio Mendoza, which is under design, and the other in the Rio Chubut, which is completing its feasibility phase. I want to proudly share with you the news that the water fund number 26 is being launched as we speak. It's the Guanajuato Water Fund in Mexico, with a special focus on water efficiency for agricultural use, given their particular challenges. Here, last from my part, I want to share some links and several web pages. If you have any doubt, I'm available for you to contact me, and I give the floor now to my colleague Jaime Camacho, who will briefly present the Guayaquil Water Fund in Ecuador. Thank you. Jaime, the floor is yours.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon. As Anna said, I'm going to present the Guayaquil Water Fund, and we are going to present that because we think it's a good example of how to manage water fund in a traditional way that protects the watersheds, but also has a nexus with the estuary. So I wanted to present the Guayas River watershed in the Gulf of Guayaquil. The Guayas River watershed is the biggest river in the Pacific of South America. And it has around 30,000 square kilometers, which represents 12% of the Ecuadorian territory, and it has around 40% of the Ecuador population. It's a very important watershed also because it's a very productive area. We have internal consumption products like rice or sugarcane, but also exportation products like banana, coffee, cacao, oil palm, teak, balsa, and also some cattle in the watershed. I don't think I have the control on the presentation, but the next slide.
I'm trying. All right. Hold on a minute, please. I don't know why I can't do it. Okay, a ver. Okay. Where are we? Oh, sorry.
Okay.
There.
And then, okay. And then the Guayas River watershed ends on the Gulf of Guayaquil, which conforms the delta of the river, and has it's an ecosystem that includes estuaries, islands, dry forests, but mainly mangroves. A lot of the places that you are seeing in the maps are it's the biggest mangrove in Ecuador. It's also a very important place for fisheries, and especially a collection of crabs and oysters. Crab industry is very important for the city of Guayaquil, which is the biggest city in Ecuador. It has a lot of crab consumption. Then you have also in this place, you have a shrimp industry. The shrimp industry is, I think, the second or third export product in Ecuador. So it's a very important place, but also a very special pressure for the ecosystems. And then you have the transport area. This is part of the transport area for the Guayaquil port, which is an important port in Ecuador. And the next one, please. So we have done an analysis, and we find some threats in the watershed and in the estuary. And one of the biggest one is the sedimentation. We have a lot of sedimentation that comes from deforestation in the upperlands, but we also have a lot of sediments that goes from the estuary to the river, and that put in danger even the water intake for the city, because sometimes in the year there is too much sediment and they cannot take water from the river. We have also in some places big floodings. We also have the transport of garbage and other contaminants in the water. We have deforestation, and we have also agricultural and cattle ranching practice that are not good for the river and not good for the estuary, because everything that goes in the river sometimes goes into the estuary also. The next one, please. So to try to solve some of those problems, we create the Guayaquil Water Fund. It's Anna explained what is a water fund. It's a group of institutions that work to protect mainly water, and with a watershed approach. We create this water fund in 2015. There was some time to develop the conservation plan that is now prepared, and it begins its operation on 2019. And it's important to know that for example, we have in the water fund, we have the water company, we have beverage companies, we have also another local and international companies, even an Ecuadorian bank working on the water fund. They are the ones that finance the water fund. The next one, please. So as I told you, we have this conservation plan. We made a conservation plan to work in the area, and we have developed some in the left. You can see what we have designed, and on the right, the things that we have beginning to work in 2019. So we are working on conservation of key areas through the creation of local protected areas with local governments, or conservation agreements with different stakeholders. We also have planned to work on riparian and headwaters restoration. We are not only thinking on reforestation, but mainly on restoration. Some erosion control, sewage treatment, because there's a lot of cities located on the river that do not treat the water in the correct manner. We are also working on agricultural and cattle ranching best practices, some education and communication and monitoring. And as you see in the right, we have not started yet doing the restoration or the erosion control or the sewage treatment, but we have our work in the other areas. In the specific part of the estuary, which is some of our interests, we have worked mainly on mangrove conservation. So I told you that the Gulf of Guayaquil is very important for mangrove in Ecuador. We have the most big area of mangrove in Ecuador in the Gulf in Guayaquil, and we have developed a strategy with the government and other institutions to protect mangroves with local people. So what we do is that we sign agreements with the local communities. So they help us work in the protection. They do surveillance, control, check for illegal fishing, and they have the right. I mean, they support us in the control, but they also have the right to strike some crab or some oyster in a sustainable way. So we are working with them in stretching their capacities to do this work, but also developing some productive activities so they can get more money from the products that they strike. And we are also working in a communitarian communication plan, so to communicate what we are doing to other communities. The next one, please. And in our way forward, in this case, we want to continue. We're going to continue working with conservation and development initiative in the watershed and in the Gulf. But our vision and why we think it's important to present this case is because we think the estuary should be managed in an integral way, and that means managing the estuary, but also the watershed that affects that estuary. And we think that the water funds are the ideal space for working that, because we can find the money and the governance to work on that. And we are working with our water fund to expand our work and include mangroves in a more integral way to work, because the water funds were, and this one was also created specifically to protect the headwaters. But since we are in the end of the watershed, we have begun to work in these other issues that are not so common for other water funds. And that's what we want to share with you. And the last one, it's just the information from our organization, where you can find more information about our water funds and our institutions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ana and Jaime, for that interesting presentation. And finally, I'm going to present the last case. I'm going to present the speaker in Spanish. He is Mr. Eber José Sosa Fabre, profesor en Ciencias Naturales, trabaja en Fundación Humedales como coordinador del programa Humedales Cuyo y Alto Andinos. Es miembro activo del Grupo para la Conservación de los Flamencos Altoandinos, miembro fundador de Fundación para el Estudio e Intervención Socioambiental, docente de Ecología y Biodiversidad en la Tecnicatura Superior en Conservación de la Naturaleza, coordinador de proyectos de cosecha y aprovechamiento de agua de lluvia, sitio Ramsar Lagunas de Guanacache, coordinador de programa Conservando los Humedales Altoandinos en el Monumento Nacional Laguna Pozuelos y en Salinas Grandes, Jujuy, lidera proyectos en restauración en lagunas de Guanacache y ha publicado libros y artículos sobre humedales, aves acuáticas y ecología de flamencos. Bueno, bienvenido, Eber.
Buenos días,
Sí,
buenos días.
buen día.
¿Cómo están? Bueno, ahí comparto pantalla. Bueno, la idea es traerles a esta mesa y agradecerles la invitación y tan nutrida charla que hemos estado escuchando. Y de alguna manera nos hemos sentido identificados en algunas de los casos y los estudios que nos han estado mostrando. En este caso vamos a venir a Argentina, vamos a mostrar una zona árida, un sector de antiguos humedales donde se desarrollaban pueblos originarios, pueblos huarpes, que se llama Lagunas de Guanacache. Lo que hemos estado haciendo en estos últimos 10 años con Fundación Humedales, Wetland International y Fundación Avina, más las comunidades originarias, es una prueba de restauración ecológica y participativa de estos humedales. Para ubicarnos, estamos en América Latina, Argentina, centro-este Argentina, al pie de la cordillera de los Andes, en la ciudad de Mendoza, y al este de la ciudad de Mendoza se desarrolla un sistema de bañados y lagunas de aproximadamente 1 millón de hectáreas, antiguo, denominado Lagunas de Guanacache. Y no es ni más ni menos que el colector de una gran cuenca, que es la cuenca de Desaguadero, que tiene otros ríos y arroyos que vienen todos de la cordillera, producto el agua producto del deshielo. Eso llega a un gran valle de inundación, de suelos secos, zonas áridas, llueve 100 milímetros en el año, para que se den una idea, y se desarrollan estos humedales en la zona de monte. El pueblo huarpe, hace 200 años, se desarrollaba en este sector, eran pescadores, artesanos, vivían de los humedales, y por el desarrollo urbano de ciudades en la parte media de las cuencas y subcuencas que alimentaban estas lagunas, se fue secando en estos últimos 100 años y se fue transformando esta comunidad originaria que vivía de los humedales en hombres del desierto. Es decir, gente que vivía del agua, hoy está sobreviviendo de alguna manera, cerca de 6.000 habitantes, 12 comunidades huarpes, de las aguas de lluvia y aguas subterráneas. Con un ganado caprino adaptado a este tipo de ambientes. Lo que ocurrió fue que las cuencas y el agua que venía de la cordillera bajaba hacia estos humedales y fue captado en estos últimos años por el desarrollo de las ciudades. Entonces lo que ha pasado ha sido que se ha desecado las lagunas, ha dejado desnudos esos suelos, se ha degradado la vegetación y se ha producido una erosión muy fuerte de los suelos. El problema de degradación que hay de los humedales, en realidad en todo el mundo es muy similar. Lo único que cambia son los actores. Todos tenemos sequías, hay contaminación, invasiones biológicas, se canalizan los cauces, se embancan esos cauces, y eso hace que no llegue el agua a los humedales. Pero lo más problemático que tenemos en este sector de zonas áridas y desérticas es la erosión de los basamento, es decir, pérdida de suelo. El agua la podemos tener, pero si no tenemos el suelo, el agua sigue su viaje. Ese es el gran problema. Entonces, en esta diapositiva tratamos de mostrar cómo el humedal se degrada. O sea, desde el origen del humedal se seca, se forman las barrancas y las cárcavas, a veces por caminos de animales. Cuando llueve, se lleva el suelo y termina por degradarse todo el sistema de humedales. Es decir, lo que se ve ahí en la diapositiva es que el nivel de base de los colectores, de los ríos, los arroyos colectores, donde los humedales están en su alrededor, en sus riberas, al bajar su nivel de base por erosión, el agua pierde, cae al colector y de esta manera los humedales se degradan. ¿Cuál es el modelo de intervención que uno se imaginó al principio? La idea sería poder hacer una obra que capture agua, capture sedimento y que de alguna manera mantenga las características ecológicas de los humedales ribereños y que el agua siga su recorrido por el colector. Es decir, juntar agua de lluvia para poder recuperar estos humedales. Esto sería una intervención a gran escala. Hay intervenciones a menor escala, que serían en estas barrancas, que se juntaría el agua a partir de la lluvia. Bueno, en el año 2010 empezamos con el proyecto, con distintos financiamientos, con apoyo, como decíamos, de la Fundación Avina, desde Wetlands International, con instituciones de la provincia de Mendoza, con municipios y con pobladores locales. El objetivo fue recuperar los humedales con la participación de los locales, que son los actores principales que fueron sufriendo y que son los usuarios principales del sistema. El modelo lo pusimos en práctica, sería una barranca que hemos elegido, se hacen distintas obras de contención de agua y sedimento, que son azudes, terraplenes revestidos, que se van poniendo a distintas distancias en la barranca antes que el agua de lluvia caiga al colector. Ahí se ve el colector, que es el río Desaguadero, donde perdió su nivel de base, y el bañado, hay una diferencia de varios metros, y esos son los que queremos recuperar con estas trampas de sedimento y trampas de agua. Con el tiempo se van llenando, 1 o 2 años, aparecen periodos lluviosos, de nuevo acá llueve una vez al año, 100 milímetros acumulados en el año, esto es en periodo estival, en verano, a partir de diciembre a febrero son las lluvias, en estos sectores de cárcavas que eran los viejos fondos de lagunas. Ahí se ve claramente un viejo fondo de laguna, unas barrancas, que sería la cicatriz que se está tratando de recuperar de estos fondos de humedales. Ahí se ve la obra y por eso el agua está retenida después de un periodo lluvioso. Bueno, en el tiempo empieza a recuperar la vegetación, la fauna, es decir, que la naturaleza empieza a responder a esta nueva variable que nosotros le estamos ayudando con estas obras de restauración. Es decir, que hay una buena recuperación de parte de la flora y de parte de la fauna. Y eso se está midiendo con distintos programas de monitoreo, incluso participativos, con la gente, capacitaciones, en fin. Con la gente del lugar, con técnicos locales, con las distintas participación de actores, ya sea provinciales, municipales, se diseñan las obras y se ponen en práctica las acciones. Se hicieron más de 50 talleres para ponernos de acuerdo dónde se podrían hacer las obras, dónde estaban estas viejas lagunas y dónde la gente básicamente necesita que el agua se retenga para poder aprovechar los servicios ecosistémicos que son básicamente reservorio de agua dulce y generación de pasturas naturales para la ganadería. Se hacen estas obras que son terraplenes, se revisten con membrana geotextil, después se tapa con el material del lugar y se deja que empiece a funcionar. Una vez que el agua de lluvia llega, es atrapada y la vegetación reacciona a tal punto que la obra queda perdida en el paisaje. Esa sería la idea, que la obra no se vea. Para eso necesitamos años de recuperación y sobre todo de mantenimiento por algunos eventos de inundación o rupturas de obra, etc. Para que se den una idea, eso sería una de las barrancas más importantes de la zona, que esos eran viejos fondos de laguna, fíjense el ambiente desértico, cómo se manifiesta en esta imagen, y se hace la obra en un lugar estratégico de esa barranca, para atrapar sedimento y atrapar el agua. Esa obra se hace con la gente del lugar, con nuestros de Mendoza, técnicos del municipio, en fin, y principalmente los pobladores locales. Se tapa con la membrana geotextil, después se tapa con tierra y esperamos la lluvia. Y esto queda después de 1, 2 o 3 periodos lluviosos. Es decir, está la obra ya vegetada, como ustedes ven, ese terraplén ya aparecieron algunas plantas, todas plantas del lugar, nosotros no ponemos, no forestamos ni revegetamos en este caso, sino que dejamos que responda la naturaleza por sí sola, es decir, aparecen plantas y aparece la fauna silvestre. Y sobre todo, lo importante, lo que se está midiendo, es cómo se acumula sedimento en estas barrancas, porque lo que nosotros necesitamos, además de juntar agua, es juntar el sedimento que se perdió, que se erosionó, que se llevaron, que se llevó la erosión hídrica y eólica, y que nos dejó estas barrancas. Entonces, recuperar y cicatrizar estos fondos, viejos fondos de laguna. Bien, del 2011 a la fecha hemos recuperado unas 1000 hectáreas de humedales. En realidad están en proceso de recuperación. Esto es un proceso lento, todos lo que me he estado diciendo, que los tiempos son muy importantes, esto es a muy largo plazo. Piensen que nosotros tenemos detectadas barrancas que se ha perdido hasta 12 metros de sedimento, es decir, de suelo, 12 metros de nivel de base ha perdido. Y esos 12 metros hay que recuperarlos con estos procesos de captura de agua y sedimento, que estamos juntando unos 80 centímetros, 1 metro, 1,5 metros por año, o a veces por periodo lluvioso, según las lluvias. Es decir, que nos está llevando mucho tiempo recuperar estos suelos perdidos. Se ha trabajado en una franja de humedales de unos 65 kilómetros, donde hay 3 comunidades huarpes, hay unas 300 familias, todos ganaderos, y esos sectores que se ven azules, en azules son las zonas en recuperación, y los puntos rojos serían las obras. Se hicieron 23 obras y se está recuperando unas 1000 hectáreas de humedales. Esto sería un 5% del sitio Ramsar que estamos trabajando ahí, que es el sitio Ramsar de Guanacache. Los resultados obtenidos hasta ahora sería que podemos aprovechar el agua de lluvia, es decir, venía por los ríos. Hoy, con los pobladores, hemos aprendido, nos estamos capacitando en capturar agua de lluvia y guardarla en estos reservorios naturales con estas ayudas de estas obras. El proyecto se maneja prácticamente con la gente, con las comunidades, en reuniones, asambleas donde ellos deciden dónde hacer las intervenciones y de qué manera participar para la construcción de las obras, para el monitoreo, para el mantenimiento y sobre todo para el seguimiento de cómo están funcionando después de cada una de las lluvias. Es decir, que la gobernanza del proyecto sí o sí hay que tratar de que se asegure, pero con la participación local. Es decir, el apoyo que podemos poner nosotros desde las instituciones, las ONG o del financiamiento que uno puede ir consiguiendo, tiene que estar basado en la participación de las comunidades. Se han acumulado 4 hectómetros cúbicos de agua por año. Eso es, para que se den una idea, unas 2.500 piletas olímpicas con agua. Eso se acumula después de la lluvia de 70 milímetros y puede durar hasta el año siguiente. Las obras son rápidas y de bajo costo, son obras que en 4 días la podemos hacer con 20 personas, se recuperan los servicios ecosistémicos y beneficia a unas 300 familias. Bien. Viendo esta imagen del antes y el después, cuando nosotros empezamos a trabajar allá en el 2010-2011, estas zonas desérticas, donde la gente nos decía acá el agua, después de la lluvia el agua se va, en un día el agua no la tenemos más. y queremos recuperar nuestros humedales, nuestras lagunas, para poder quedarnos a vivir acá y nuestros hijos y desarrollar nuestra cultura en el sector. Una tarea difícil hasta que empezamos a hacer estas pruebas. Hoy, después de 10 años de haber construido estas obras, les cuento que hemos tenido muchas fallas, que se han roto un montón de obras, que no le damos en el clavo del tipo de materiales, el tipo de suelo que había que mover con la máquina, pero todo eso se fue aprendiendo junto con la gente y hoy se logró tener algún primer resultado. Lo primero es esto, que podemos aprovechar el agua de lluvia, que el ambiente responde cuando uno hace una intervención, que las intervenciones cuando se hace participar a los actores locales, hay una apropiación clara del proyecto por parte de los actores. Y lo que ahora nos está costando un poco, digo, por una cuestión de afecto, además, es que uno tiene que dejar que el proyecto funcione por sí solo, es decir, que nosotros nos tenemos que apartar, nos tenemos que salir del proyecto, salir a buscar otros lugares para hacer réplica, pero el proyecto tiene que quedar en la comunidad, es decir, que la comunidad tiene que apropiarse y que nosotros, los técnicos, pudiéramos alejarnos del lugar para ir a hacer réplicas a otros sectores y que la gente no se dé cuenta, es decir, que no nos estén esperando que venga la gente de la Fundación o los técnicos para realizar las obras o para hacer los monitoreos o para hacer los mantenimientos, ¿no? Simplemente que dejar la enseñanza, que ocurra el proceso de aprendizaje y que la gente local y los actores puedan apropiarse del proyecto y empezar a poder resolver desde las comunidades los problemas de conservación y mantenimiento de los humedales. Ese era mi aporte. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Ever. Thank you very much, Ever, for your great presentation. It's very important to reach this level of participation of the civil society and the cooperation with the institutions. So, well, we are going to join the discussion rooms in different languages with the moderators. I'm going to share the screen. I don't know if you can see the screen. I want to share the moderators of today that are going to lead each one of the groups in different languages. They were here in the first webinar and they will be here in the third one. So I thank everyone and we can go directly to the rooms and then we meet again here in the plenary to see the conclusion. Thank you very much. So we are reaching to the end of the webinar. Well, I see a lot of work in the different boards of the groups. The idea is to close the ideas that we built last Wednesday and today. Each one of the moderators is going to present a little bit which were the main ideas of their discussion. We will have to be very quickly in our explanation because we don't have much time, but if you like, we can start with group one. If you see in my screen, we can have Mariela, are you there to explain a little bit about the conclusions of the group?
Sí, hola, acá estoy. Quedamos súper cortadas.
She's going to speak in Spanish, so if you like to hear the English, you can choose the word and change to the English channel. Sorry, María, you can start.
Bueno, Vero, hacemos un breve punteo del miércoles pasado y lo llevamos a cómo completamos hoy, ¿verdad? ¿Es así?
Por favor, sí.
Bueno, básicamente el trabajo del miércoles pasado en el grupo 1 fue naturalmente como se dio la conversación y encontramos la importancia de poner en relevancia la idea del agua, cómo aparece y cómo nos muestra, que de alguna manera hoy salió ese tema en varias de las exposiciones, aparece como mostrándonos mostrándonos qué es cómo es la naturaleza, o trayendo a de nuevo, culturalmente, a nuestra idea de la naturaleza, y eso fue muy importante. Entonces, nos basamos en conflictos y posibilidades que daba este paraguas conceptual frente a estos conflictos, sobre todo territoriales y urbanos, y tenían que ver con ocupaciones inapropiadas, la impermeabilización de los territorios, y sobre todo la complejidad de los arroyos y las cañadas entubados, que hacía que colapsen los sistemas en casos de inundación. Las posibilidades que esto traía, digamos, esta mirada o este concepto, digamos, y poder transportarlo a los territorios, básicamente tenían que ver con reacondicionamiento de las plantas construidas, de la planta física, ensayar con dispositivos de jardines de agua o ingeniería blanda, de infraestructura verde, desarrollar una normativa gestionable para que se pueda gestionar todos estos cambios y estas transformaciones, y una idea era explorar esto que aparece como una emergencia esporádica frente a una crisis, explorarlo como el potencial que tiene de volver a traer esta infraestructura del paisaje conectada con la naturaleza en nuestros territorios. En eso nos quedamos el miércoles pasado, y hoy, que está bastante... nos quedó un poco corto, digamos, pero en lo que estábamos explorando las ideas era tener una visión en los territorios, ¿no? Ponernos de acuerdo intersectorialmente y con todos los actores que intervienen en estos conflictos, para poder tener una visión común de los problemas, para poder llegar a una visión común de las soluciones. Eso era como algo muy importante, poder consensuar cuáles son los conflictos verdaderos y a qué escala llegan para poder determinar y consensuar cuáles son las soluciones. Y básicamente las complejidades más grandes es el cambio de paradigma, de pasar de un paradigma a otro en nuestros territorios, en Latinoamérica, donde más o menos éramos todos los de nuestro grupo de discusión, y poder romper los clústeres cerrados de actores que toman decisiones, que son decisiones tradicionales y que se repiten porque son los que tienen más poder de llegada a estos proyectos. Básicamente se complementa esto con el conocimiento intersectorial y de todos los actores en la puesta en común de estos conflictos.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Marie. Perfecto, perdón, pensé que estaba muteada. Sorry, I thought I was mute. Thank you, Mariela, for your presentation. We can go to group 2, which is Daniel and Nahuel. If you can start.
Sí, gracias, Verónica. Voy a empezar, voy a empezar en español. En nuestro grupo sí se concentraron, nos concentramos en Latinoamérica, y hemos repetido mucho desde el primer día el tema de la gobernanza, que es esencial para el desarrollo de proyectos y para trabajar con la naturaleza. Se habló mucho sobre la necesidad de concertación entre diferentes actores urbanos. Es muy importante establecer alianzas para poder sustentar proyectos. Y un punto muy importante que tratamos es sobre la tenencia y el uso de la tierra. Si no podemos, es necesario establecer una buena reglamentación para el uso del suelo, e impedir que haya ocupaciones o transformaciones del suelo que son indeseables y que están completamente desligadas del valor de la naturaleza. Por ejemplo, acciones inmobiliarias sobre humedales. Si bien existen una serie de reglamentos y normativas, se habló mucho en el grupo de que no se respetan o hay demasiada burocracia como para poder ser desarrollados de una manera más sostenible. ¿Daniel?
Sí, no, y también sumar en torno a esto, lo que veíamos es, por un lado, pensar en esta sostenibilidad, de la sostenibilidad de la gobernanza también como un elemento, y pensarla a distintos plazos, a largos plazos, a cortos plazos, a mediano plazo. Para mí fue hoy muy esperanzador el pensar esto de los proyectos a 100 años, ¿no? Y sacar como de eje las discusiones del primer momento. Me parece que eso estuvo muy bien, muy clarificador para pensar también nuestro accionar en Latinoamérica, pero en el mundo entero. Y en particular hoy lo que nos surgía es, tenemos un grupo bastante repartido de distintos lugares, y entonces bajar un poco esto a los casos locales que tenemos, a cuáles son las realidades de cada uno de los participantes de este grupo, y más allá de que entramos un poquito, y ahí hay algunos casos nombrados y demás, en Concepción del Uruguay, en Colombia, en el oeste del Gran Buenos Aires, en La Plata y demás, que surgían distintos casos, pero lo que me parece que es súper interesante es algunos porque ya está puesto en marcha algún dispositivo que toma algún eje vinculado con las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, y en otros casos en donde se hace muy evidente la necesidad de cambiar el paradigma, porque las prácticas continúan siendo, por ejemplo, nos contaban en un caso en Colombia donde el río, esperen que chequeo el nombre, Chicú, ahí nos lo había corregido John, tiene un proceso de rectificación todavía, ¿no? En función de un fallo y demás, y entonces, como está pensado solamente desde la dinámica hídrica y no desde la dinámica ecosistémica. Entonces, nos parece que es súper interesante pensar esto, porque hay prácticas que todavía están ancladas en paradigmas que ya están obsoletos, pero además lo que me parece a mí súper interesante en medio de todo esto, es que veíamos que de todos los casos que se contaban, hay casos propuestos desde la universidad, desde la academia, otros casos son desde el accionar del Estado, otros desde el emprendimiento privado de la empresa constructora, desarrolladora, y lo digo como por la incorporación de variables, no por el caso de la amenaza, ¿no? Desde donde nos contaban es como había una ingeniería adaptativa pensada desde lo ecosistémico para pensar nuevos procesos de urbanización, o por ejemplo desde las organizaciones y comunitarias, ambientalistas y demás, los proyectos, los programas pueden ser pensados desde los distintos lugares, surgir desde los distintos lugares, pero requieren sí o sí este intercambio, y volvemos otra vez hasta a esta articulación entre academia, organizaciones y demás para poder construir este conocimiento. Y lo que da la impresión es que, como pensar por un lado, que este conocimiento requiere, como por un lado, una mirada desde la academia, desde las instituciones y demás que tienen el conocimiento científico específico, y por el otro lado, un saber popular que necesita ser incorporado y que necesita ser revalorizado, y que tal vez tiene que ver con comunidades campesinas, con organizaciones, comunidades indígenas. Hoy también apareció en el último de los casos, me pareció súper interesante, ¿no? Como las comunidades indígenas también tienen un saber popular que construye esta mirada de las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, y también pensar en otros actores, un montón de otros actores y observadores de la naturaleza, y ahí nos van a aparecer los ambientalistas, los niños, los ancianos, ¿no? Y ahí aparecía esto de la dinámica del juego, ¿no? Los observadores de pájaros, los preservadores de distintos espacios, los agricultores, que tienen todo un saber que cuando ese cruce se produce entre academia o la ciencia y el saber popular, empezamos a construir una mirada de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, que en nuestro caso y en todos los casos del mundo pareciera ser como muy, muy enfocado, ¿no?
Okay. Perfecto, muchísimas gracias por las conclusiones del grupo. Vamos a pasar al grupo 3. Diego, if you want to make the conclusions of group 3. I don't know if Diego is...
Sorry.
yes, we can hear you. Yes,
basically, we have a a very active and quite interesting group. I would like to start by the lesson learned and how we understand, well, starting by in the lesson learned, this idea that it's essential to recognize the change of paradigm from protection towards ecosystem services. By recognizing this in nature-based solution, the idea that is proposed by the lecturers to explore better and more expanded potentialities and possibilities, integrating green and natural infrastructure through a process of eco-services, and particularly coupling different kind of strategy is very much a clear alignment that can facilitate the expansion and the upscaling of this method. We also talk, and particularly in the issue of how to sustain in the long term the people participation, how to sustain in the long term a policy definition, and how to sustain in the long term these kind of goals. One of the key aspects that was discussed in the group was basically this. First, the value, as the key challenge, the value of communication. So the value of communication in order to enhance the actors involved in the process is essential, not just from the conceptualization, but particularly, and this is very much aligned to what was talking to a more living lab. So the concrete and small actions are extremely valuable at the local level to be able to break down the shortness of the process and expand first people participation. Through people participation, and in a way the policy framing that allow the people to feel interpreted, but at the same time the different governance level to be able to find it attractive. It's a very clear proposal reinforcing the lesson learned that nature-based solutions are a problem-solving approach. It's an essentiality to consider. Within that, the ideas that had been reinforcing the challenge were really much proposed or reinforced the value of the local level, and particularly the local level in their governance, as was proposed that the Sponge City program was really much in China was really much supported by the majors and the local actors. Well, this is considered in our group one of the key challenge, and maybe part of the lesson learned that we would like to hear. And finally, the idea is that the different gaps that were proposed by Chris Sevenberger as in the shift process include not just education, but very active involved, and very active involved that in a certain way can pressure the political regimes to understand the value. But by the local and the more bottom-up processes is the only way that we can conceive long-term agreements and very active agreements to be able to generate a more robust type of action. But also these are connected in our challenge to until what extent short-term action with short-term revenues to the local level can be guarantee in the long run. Well, this is very much aligned, according to our group, with the multiplicity of strategies that nature-based solution can define from a natural backbone towards different kind of eco-services, and that is very much the challenge of scaling up and in the same time aligned with the call of more clarification in the costs and benefits, that by that we can also expand innovation at the different scales that nature-based solution can be deployed, and through that the idea of integrated and scaling up the bigger actors or the strongest actor is an essentiality. So the key idea was how to build trust.
Yes. I will ask if Yuting or Raquel want to add something, because today we joined 3 groups in one, so maybe they can add something from your previous conversation in your groups. If you like, you can. Okay, well, if not, well, we can go to the next group 5. Begoña, if you like to start.
Sí, en inglés o español, o da lo mismo finalmente.
Como quieras, porque está la traductora, así que sí.
Sí, tengo las notas en español, así que voy a seguir en español.
Ah, bueno.
Y bueno, voy a hacer un resumen de lo que hablamos en los 2 días. Nuestras preguntas fueron, creo que bastante similares a la mayoría, pero ¿cuáles son los principales conceptos presentados? O sea, ¿cuáles son los conceptos más significativos de los que se discutieron? Y cómo se evalúa la posible implementación de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza dentro de su contexto. Y creo que también, como la mayoría de los grupos, nos enfocamos en las lecciones aprendidas durante la sesión, la jornada, y en los desafíos futuros. Entonces, durante la primera jornada, que era en general sobre las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, discutimos mucho como esta necesidad de un nuevo marco conceptual para la investigación y en general de nuevo paradigma que hay en torno a las soluciones frente a los desafíos que enfrentamos. También se habló de la vulnerabilidad social y su relación con el conflicto ambiental, y específicamente sobre esta pandemia, que fue un tema que salió y que es bastante importante y que nos afecta a todos, cómo la pandemia ha afectado distintos aspectos de nuestras vidas, entre ellos las actividades al aire libre, por ejemplo, y cómo eso afecta a nuestra salud. Hablamos del rol de la participación de las comunidades y de la sociedad como un actor activo en la toma de decisiones y en la implementación de soluciones. También sobre la naturaleza, bueno, que sin naturaleza no hay un soporte social ni económico y que necesitamos proteger, gestionar y restaurar nuestros recursos naturales. Y algo que era bastante importante, que también se discutió por un rato, fue la relevancia de los compromisos a largo plazo, de cómo muchas veces existen proyectos, por ejemplo, sobre soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, que van de acuerdo a plazos políticos u otro tipo de plazos. Finalmente, estos compromisos tienen que ser pensados más a largo plazo. Y eso puede ser asegurado a través del compromiso ciudadano. Creo que me estoy demorando mucho, así que voy a resumir un poco. Algunos de los principales desafíos que tenemos o que vemos son competencias entre distintos sectores y como este pensamiento más de silos, compartimentalizado, y la necesidad de integración y la necesidad de hacer más fuerte nuestra gobernanza. Y un tema que salió al final fue visibilizar la necesidad de visibilizar las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Hay muchas veces que no estamos tan conscientes, o quizá nosotros sí porque trabajamos en eso, pero no todo el mundo está tan consciente que cierto tipo de soluciones efectivamente tienen un propósito y son soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Y creo que ese fue un tema que también salió hoy, la necesidad de visibilizarlas, y hablamos también de las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza como un dispositivo, y de esta necesidad de una visión sistémica e interdisciplinaria de los sistemas verdes, azules y grises. En general, hubieron varios puntos sobre cómo es necesario repensar nuestro territorio, nuestro rol en el territorio, la manera en que vemos y que desarrollamos o que implementamos obras de ingeniería, por ejemplo, y creo que eso se relaciona bastante a lo que se habló en la jornada pasada sobre este nuevo paradigma. Y otro punto importante que también se vincula a lo que hablamos la semana pasada tiene que ver con el liderazgo, con cómo un buen liderazgo puede llevar a una visión colectiva y cómo esa visión colectiva es necesaria para afrontar los desafíos futuros de pasar de proyectos o de pilotos o de soluciones a una escala muy pequeña o muy puntuales a programas y compromisos políticos y ciudadanos de largo plazo. Y otro punto importante, creo que este sería el último, hay bastantes más, pero bueno, la conversación estuvo muy interesante. Otro punto importante fue las soluciones que nacen desde la gente, que siempre es de mucho valor tener menos burocracia y más acción. y el valor que hay en eso, pero siempre entendiendo el sistema completo. Está bien que existan estas soluciones que nacen desde la gente a una escala muy específica, pero es importante que para llegar a esas soluciones también entendamos cómo funciona el territorio, y no solo nuestro metro cuadrado. Espero haber cubierto todos los puntos que discutimos, y ahora le doy el paso al siguiente grupo.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Begoña. Muy interesante la discusión que tuvieron. Y bueno, vamos a dar lugar al último grupo. Diego Rusticucci, si quieres iniciar.
Acá estoy.
Ahí está.
¿Se escucha?
Perfecto, sí.
Bueno, voy a tratar de ir bien como indica el post-it. En la primera reunión sobre las lecciones aprendidas, destacaron el conocimiento profundo del entorno de intervención, la necesidad de continuidad de las medidas que se apliquen de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, lo que implicaría entenderlas como política pública, la aprehensión y concientización sobre la necesidad de abordar los impactos del cambio climático con este tipo de estrategias, la limitación que se expresa en la infraestructura gris tradicional para abordar los problemas actuales y la necesaria transición hacia un esquema que incorpore la infraestructura azul y verde como estructurantes, valga la redundancia. Consideración de recomendaciones y casos internacionales para la planificación y la acción, necesidad de articulación entre la conciencia en la academia y la falta de ella en el ámbito profesional y político, ¿sí? Reducir el gap que notamos existe naturalmente en un tema que no tiene tanto recorrido. Avance de las agendas internacionales, lo vemos como una cosa sumamente interesante, y es una oportunidad para considerarlas en el diseño de las políticas públicas. Y con respecto a los desafíos, avanzar hacia una articulación interjurisdiccional robusta para el diseño e implantación de las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, una apertura real a la participación ciudadana e institucional, entender los recursos hídricos de una manera integral y holística, ¿sí? Y avanzar en la gestión integral de cuencas. Como dije, un desafío, la articulación entre la formación, el acervo que existe en la academia y la acción concreta. Incorporar el estudio y el trabajo interdisciplinar. Confrontar soluciones de la infraestructura gris sobre temas específicos con soluciones planteadas bajo este nuevo criterio, para evaluar con datos y evidencia las decisiones y futuras políticas. Articulación entre las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza y los modelos de desarrollo urbano que cada ciudad o cada metrópolis esté impulsando. Eso de alguna manera resume lo que se charló la semana pasada, y si bien hoy éramos pocos y mucho giró en torno a estas mismas consideraciones, se subrayó muchísimo el tema de la concientización, el crear una conciencia sobre la necesidad de avanzar sobre este tipo de estrategias de una manera horizontal en toda la sociedad. Y me parece que ahí bueno, hubo un claro hincapié en la educación en todos los niveles para generar una conciencia concreta, toda vez que además, y hoy creo que se planteó en alguna de las exposiciones, muchas veces para ver un impacto concreto de las acciones, efectos, que la población las haga evidentes, se necesita de una acción, de una escala, de una masa crítica que no necesariamente siempre está al alcance de los gobiernos y de quienes pueden intervenir en los sistemas. Así que me parece que para poder tener digamos, una sustentabilidad de este tipo de acciones, sostenerlas en el tiempo, es indispensable cruzar esas dos cuestiones, la acción concreta, pero por otro lado la concientización con una amplia gama de acciones.
Estás muteada, Verónica. Estás muteada, Vero, ¿eh?
Se escucha, Verónica.
¿Ahora?
Perfecto.
Ahora sí. Ah, toqué, pero se ve que no marcó, perdón. Sorry, I was mute. Well, thank you very much for all the conclusions of the groups. They were very interesting. They are all referring to the same subjects of the necessity of co-creating this new vision of a city that integrates nature with existing infrastructure and also gray infrastructure, and how to build this vision and how to overcome these political and economic barriers that we all have in our different contexts. So thank you very much. I invite you to the third webinar next week. We are going to focus on the economic aspects of MBS, how to build effective business models to finance these types of interventions. So I thank especially the speakers and the moderators and the participants for being here today. Thank you very much. See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye. See you.
Nos vemos, chao.
Chao.
Gracias a todos, a todos.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Gracias, hasta luego.
Bye.
Gracias, chao.
Muchas gracias, excelente encuentro. Adiós, gracias.